Welcome, welcome. This is number 2 of 5 with Gaia Morrissette. And we've been exploring a lot of really great topic areas. And one of the ones that I asked for us to sort of explore is because of my own background, is that I'm lived a very eclectic life, done a lot of different kind of jobs, even to the world of HIV and AIDS in Africa, doing a survey of what a country knows, and then developing a health promotion program and working on HIV and AIDS in the workplace. And that got me to thinking, and I said, can we just explore things like maybe sexual energy and safety in the workplace business? And Gaia said, okay. And so I said, okay, so we're just going to explore it and see what happens here. So setting this up, this notion of sexual energy, because people do meet husbands and wives and girlfriends and boyfriends and everything else in between happens in workplaces. So this notion of sexual energy in workplaces, you want to unpack that a little bit for us?
So first of all, let's identify what sexual energy is, so for our listeners. So first of all, sexual energy is known in many other cultures as life force energy, chi energy. It's the energy of creation that moves through all of us. And how typically we move with it is in a state of arousal, or AKA horniness, right? And that's typically the average person. That's how you move with sexual energy and attraction and chemistry, okay, and reaction. So when I talk about sexual energy and bringing that into your life and bringing that into your business and bringing that into the workforce, we need to talk about consent. We need to talk about safety. We need to talk about how do we discern, how do we hold our sexual energy and not ooze it out at other people so that it makes them feel, unsafe. Right. And I think that's really, really important, and especially since we've had a lot of conversations in the world around Me Too and a breaching of, and sexual harassment in the workplace. There's been a problem, and there's been a problem because as we've been taught to ooze our sexual energy at each other, and others are responsible for it. So I want everybody to think about it this way. I am only responsible for my own sexual gratification, and others are responsible for their own sexual gratification. When I no longer make other people responsible, and I no longer allow others to make me responsible for it, I can now step into safety without all of this really unethical, dysfunctional, disrespectful ways in which people have been moving with sex and sexuality. And so that, I think, is really important, that we need to really define that as I am responsible for my own arousal, and I'm not going to ooze it and expect you to do anything with
it. Yeah, so the key there word is responsible, responsibility.
Yes.
Aspect of it.
Yeah. So here's an example. Recently I was talking to this delightful man, and he was asking me, and he wants to be a really honorable and respectful and conscious man. And he's like, well, what happens when I find a woman attractive? How do I respond in a way that's not going to be disrespectful to her? And I said, well, you could say to her, you know what? I think you're very beautiful. I hope you have a nice day. Versus, I think you're really beautiful. Can I take you home? Right? One is an appreciation of someone's beauty, and another is an expectation that they're responsible to do something with it. So it's like, I always explain it that when you see a beautiful tree, you can honor the tree's beauty and appreciate the beauty of that tree, but you don't need to hump it. Right? It's looking at it from that perspective. It's moving in that place of that we move with beauty from a place of appreciation instead of a place of taking or owning or expecting.
Yeah, appreciation is kind of a great word there. the appreciative inquiry about looking at what is that's going on, what is it you appreciate it, and then finding a responsible way to interact in that connection at that point in time. That there's something to be said for that. So the sense of, you used it earlier, the word discernment, to discern what's actually happening in the business, in that workplace. There's got to be a few rules of thumb or guidelines that when you're looking at this notion of life energy and its an expression in the workplace. Any thoughts around that angle?
Well, I always look at it, I always tell people, okay, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So it's great to be in your own sexual energy. So you're tingly and you're live and you're horny and you're like, woo! And you're moving in that energy and you're in that frequency and you're using that for all great, awesome things that we talked about in our last conversation that you and I had, right? Now, somebody, how are they going to interact with you on that? It's like, often people then are really attracted to that and they don't know what to do with that. And so then they usually come on to you, right? There's this, like, if you're being in this sexual place and you're in this sensual place and you're in this sex energy, then that must mean that you're horny and you want some, right? So that's a societal crap going on there, all right? And the key in that is to say, instead of being angry or offended, is to say, no, thank you. No, thank you. I'm not interested. I'm in my horny bubble and my happiness, and I lovingly invite you to go create your own horniness and your own happiness and your own sexual arousal, but I don't need to play with yours, and you don't need to play with mine. So that is a really, that's the first step, right? Is to really be able to own yours and give people permission to own theirs. People don't know how. We don't know how. We don't have a society that knows what to do with this, right? So instead of being angry and feeling like somebody is being predatory in that moment, you can just lovingly give it back to them and say, no, thank you. And you don't need to take offense and you don't need to be angry about it. Now, after you've said no, thank you, and you've set up a boundary, and if somebody breaches that boundary, then that's a different conversation. Then that's when we're talking about, now we're talking about harassment. Now we're talking about abusive behavior. That's not acceptable. But I think it's important to start with, let's teach people around us how to engage with us, and by setting those parameters and those boundaries. The other thing that I think is super important is that as women, or anybody who identifies as female, to not use your sexuality as a manipulation tool. And that's an important one, because we've been taught since we were little girls that if we want things, we can use our sexuality to manipulate and get them. And in many societies and throughout time, that was the only power that we had at our disposal. And so it's really deeply rooted within who we are and our DNA and how we move and how our mothers moved and how our grandmothers moved and all the generationally, that's how we've learned it. But so I always ask women or anybody who identifies as female to really drop in for a second and say, am I being flirtatious because I'm feeling tickly and happy and I'm just sharing it? Or am I being flirtatious because I want something in return? I want attention. I want, that extra good rate at the bank. Like, why am I doing this? What is the motivator of how I'm expressing my arousal, my sexual energy in this moment? Is it to take? Is it to get? Is it to manipulate? And if so, I lovingly invite you to stop doing that, because it's not serving you and it's not serving everybody around you. And for men, I lovingly invite you to, instead of being predatory in the sense of like, I'm now going to, in that hunt mode, in that hunting mode, that hunting frequency, to just be, I appreciate your beauty. That's it. And if she is interested, or he is interested, because I don't want to be, heteronormative at this moment. So whoever you're saying this appreciation to, if they're interested, they'll lean in. And then you can then move from that place of, okay, both people are on the same page, and now we can start that dance of maybe dating, connecting, whatever what that goes into, right? So that's some of the tips that I would, how do we navigate that? Is that we share our appreciation, and then we step back and we actually share our appreciation, not because we want anything in return. See, it's all about the energy of that, right? Because the minute we have an expectation of what the outcome is going to be, our energy is either manipulative or predatory. And that doesn't matter which gender you happen to be. You can do both of those things.
Mm-hmm. So it's very much, I'll pick up on another word you use, dance, and I'll do discernment. So the dance of discernment.
Yes.
And when you are together is really get to a sense of what is going on, because there's a point where consent is going to drop into that dance of discernment.
Oh, absolutely. And consent is about verbal consent. I think this is the most important thing. If I can, share anything about how do we navigate this in the workplace, actually in life, forget just the workplace. Let's just go across the board in life, is that we need to verbally ask for what it is that we truly desire and we need and we want in that moment. And we must give the other person permission to say yes or no. And then also the person who's on the receiving end of that ask is also given permission to ask for what they desire and how do they want to move into it. And when you move from that place, you never have miscommunication. You never have one person thinking it was one thing and it wasn't really that thing, because it's really, really clear. And often I hear people are like, but that's not sexy. There's nothing sexy about, saying, may I kiss you right now? I'm like, that is very sexy, because what if you go in for a kiss? Now we've kind of progressed to now you're in that, dating scenario, right? So what if you go in to lean in and the person is like, no, I'm not comfortable with this? Versus saying, may I kiss you? And the person's like, yes, and they're ready for it. Or they have an opportunity to say, no, thank you. And then we set some clear boundaries of why and what that's about. So if we can look at a lot of the work that I do in the world is a lot about communication, and consent is a big part of the work that I do in the world. So if we can look at it as like, if I ask first, then I know how to navigate it. Then I don't have to pretend to figure out and make a wrong move and stressed out about what did I do and what did I not do and what did that really mean, and we don't have to worry about all that stuff. Just use your words and ask. But ask from a place of not expectation is the key.
What's coming to mind is what you're sharing is we could apply that to working with customers and clients.
Oh, yes, exactly. Same thing.
Oh, hang on a minute. We're not even past our first date yet, and you already want me to what? Right?
Yes.
It's like that whole story. I just sort of went over there because I was going, this is so true, right? Discernment, consent, the safety part of it in terms of working with the customers and clients. And you must weave that into some of the things that you talk about as well, right?
Oh,
because, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on is how we talk to each other, going back to that appreciation versus predatory, is that as a woman, and step into a business meeting, and I'm in a business space, okay, right? We're not at the bar, we're not in the zone of, sexual picking up, blah, blah, blah. I'm in my profession and I'm in my workspace. Telling me how good my breasts look or how good my butt looks in a pair of pants is not appropriate. And the reason it's not appropriate is because my gender shouldn't have no play in what's happening from this exchange from a business perspective. And so I often tell everybody, assume you're not attracted to both genders, okay? So it's a little harder when you're pansexual and you're bisexual, because you're like, well, I would totally say that to Bob, right? Or I would totally say that to Susie. But for all the heterosexuals, this is a really good analogy, is that would you say what you're about to say to me to the same sex? Would it be appropriate to tell Bob how good his ass looks in those new pants? Would that feel like that was an appropriate expression of a business interaction? The answer is no. Then don't do it.
Again, discernment.
Discernment.
And being responsible in the words that are coming out. Like, words matter.
Words matter.
And there's no absolute words. I get that. But those words will take you in a direction. And you've got to discern what's going on in life and in the workplace. And I appreciate when we talked in the first video, sexual energy, life energy, and living life, and this notion of the discernment and responsibility and safety. It's so important to who we are and what's going on in our world now.
Yeah, and it really makes the huge difference is that when we create that discernment and consent and safety and self-responsibility and communication, when we do all of those things, then we create this containment space, not just within ourselves of how we move in the world, but we give permission to everybody around us to also move from that same place, and to teach everybody around us to move from that new space. And it is such a beautiful space to step into, instead of that predatory and victim and taking and not speaking your truth, and all of those places that so many of us have been in. And so often in the workplace it happens because we don't have our voice, because we don't know how to say no. We don't know how to say yes either. And so when we learn how to do that and we move from that place, it's a game changer.
Yeah, and it gets down to the sense of the business pleasure. Again, we were talking about, are you enjoying being in your business, and that are you enjoying being with the others that you're interacting with? Your customers, your clients, your contractors, your vendors, your stakeholders. It doesn't matter what size of organization we're talking about here. Yeah. Is that, are you in this notion of the pleasure of being in business and doing business and having a business? I think we sometimes lose that, and we put that wall up. And what I'm hearing you share with indirectly is, there's no need for walls if you're into the discernment and you understand the safety, you understand the use of the words. You can just be who you are, be for the world, and be present, right? And I appreciate that, because I've worked all around the world and interacted with all different kinds of people. And there's sometimes I would be going, what just took place? Or what am I supposed to do now? Oh, I think I've got this one. Okay, we can actually dance and have some fun here, right? And I understand. I understand that part. Yeah. But this notion of discernment, I think, is so important. And as everyone knows, I like to go out with sort of like a final idea, and we're getting close to closing up this conversation. Discernment. What is it about discernment that is so important to what we're talking about?
Well, with discernment, you've had to take a moment to assess the situation. It's that overview of the situation that you put you've taken in all of the data, and that you're making a conscious choice of what you're going to be doing in that moment, and how are you going to engage, interact, respond, all those kind of things, versus reacting. When that's, I think, for me, the difference between discernment and just reacting to the situation, is that when we discern, we stop, we look, we take in information, we make a conscious decision, and then we act upon that place, versus we're reactive because we're triggered about whatever's going on, and we don't even know what it is, and we're just reacting. And from that place, nothing usually good ever happens.
True. And I think two words are important to what you're saying. You can be in it and you can be on it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. So what we'll do is we'll get together again, and we're going to do 3 of 5. And so, folks, you'll be able to see the next one here soon. So thank you, Guy.